you here for the Minneapolis Forward Community Now Coalition. I want to thank our incredible Council Vice President, Andrea Jenkins, for being here and for the work you're doing around the clock, and all of our coalition partners and core strategy team members, some of whom are here for this briefing and others who are also following on the live stream. Yusra Arab, Rox Anderson, Henry Jimenez, Shamburi Lee, Robert Lilligren, Allison Sharkey, Anthony Taylor, Mike Tamale, Anisha Murphy, Kenya McKnight Ahad, Marcus Owens, Felicia Perry, Jonathan Weinhagen, and Sarah Barrow. We're also joined by Sean Pierce, our administration's Director of Economic Development and Inclusion Policy, who's been a driving force behind this work. And also key coalition members, Sarah Barrow with Excel Energy and Susan Bass Roberts with the Polad Foundation are also with us here today as well. Thank you so much for being here. They and their organizations have been as reliable and as consistent partners as a mayor could possibly hope for. Thanks for being here and your commitment to doing this work differently and supporting our community. All throughout our city, we've mobilized to meet immediate needs, and that goes from hunger to housing. We are working as quickly as possible to ensure that our residents are both safe and healthy. And we are collectively committed to not just rebuilding, but creating a more inclusive and equitable Minneapolis. This is an opportunity to transform. This is an opportunity to realize the goal will take discipline and a really new approach working with community. So we're coming together today at a very pivotal moment for our city. Here are the numbers. More than 10 of the city's commercial corridors have sustained physical damages, some to the level of complete destruction. These were the very same areas that were hardest hit by COVID-19 and faced also with gentrification. More than 1,025 buildings, according to preliminary estimates, more than 1,300 businesses, many of which were owned by Black, Indigenous, people of color, including our immigrant community. Thousands of people are without work, and the list continues. This crisis is a call to action. Together, we can seize this responsibility to build a stronger city for everyone. And I want to be clear, this team is dedicated to charting a course for our city and working over the long haul to make a more just Minneapolis. I also want to be clear about what we're not doing. As part of this coalition, we are not tackling public safety issues through this group. We're additionally not tackling housing issues specifically through this group. We have a number of task forces and experts engaged in that process, in those processes, but the team you have today is dedicated to transformative work around economic inclusion. So with that, I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague and a leader on this issue, Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you so much, Mayor Fry, for leading this work, and I too want to just thank all of the members of this core strategy group, and just starting with Sean Pierce from your office, whose leadership has been outstanding to bring this work forward, but also members like Marcus Owens, Kenya McKnight, Yusra Arab, and Anisha Murphy, Anthony Taylor, and Chambori Lee, Henry Jimenez, Rox Anderson, and Robert Lilligren, and Mike Tamale all have really come together to be a part of this, thanks to the co-chairs, Felicia Perry and Allison Sharkey and Jonathan Weinhagen. You know, we are at a critical moment in Minneapolis's history. We are in the throes of a global pandemic that is threatening the health and economic safety of the physical health and economic security in our communities and communities all around the country. But we're also facing the pandemic that is racism, and how that has been a destructive force in our community. And so, you know, as a response to the unrest that has been prevalent and initiated here in Minneapolis, after the death of George Floyd, you know, we have this opportunity. Mayor, you mentioned all of the cultural corridors that have been, commercial corridors that have been damaged, and the number of businesses that have been harmed, and the number of people that are unemployed. So we got to center our economic inclusion policies and decision makings that are centered on communities of color, people of color, that can help move our city forward. I think the recommendations that this group has come up with will really create a great opportunity for us to shift the paradigm and change the conversation, that we are no longer operating as business as usual. We are going to lift up those communities that have been most marginalized in our recent and long past in history. I believe that the challenges that we are facing as a city today is going to require everybody in our city to show up and be a part of the solutions that is going to help to make our community better. And so I'm just thrilled to support this work. I was a part of our Black Business Week last August, and I'm looking forward to lifting up businesses of color, certainly Black and Brown communities, and working with all of you to bring these things to a reality. So thank you very much, Mayor, and I look forward to our continued work together.
Well, thank you, Council Vice President. And you're right, you know, right now the eyes of the world are on Minneapolis, and we have the opportunity now to do this right. And so I want to ask Jonathan Weinhagen, our champion at the Chamber and also a co-chair, to offer a high-level overview of the sprint cycle and the 8 areas of action that we're going to be diving into. Mr. Weinhagen.
Good morning, Mayor and Council Vice President. Thank you for the leadership that you have provided to our city and our community and to this effort. And thanks to all of you who have joined us today. I am Jonathan Weinhagen, President and CEO of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, and really proud and privileged to serve as a co-chair of the Minneapolis Forward Community Now Coalition, and to walk alongside this incredible group of core strategy team members and broader coalition members to envision a future for our city that I think we all share. In the aftermath of the destruction that touched every corner of the city of Minneapolis, we knew that we needed a strategy that created a space for healing and positioned us for rebuilding and transformation. I would tell you we have an opportunity and a responsibility as the Council Vice President and Mayor framed to build the most inclusive city in the world. We also recognize that in this moment, we need to center the voices of Black, Indigenous people of color, and immigrants in any strategy that we move forward. And that's exactly what we're doing. Over the past 8 weeks, our core strategy team has defined 8 areas of action. You see them on the screen. They range from business retention to reimagining public spaces and everything in between. We've organized these areas of action into 3 cycles, a series of sprints, and let me tell you, they are a series of sprints. We've spent several weeks in subgroups building out a set of recommendations that we've had the opportunity to share with the mayor, to share with other community members, to garner feedback and to further refine. Today, I'm just absolutely thrilled and excited to share the first slate of community-led recommendations, and then we'll move into the next phase of our second and third cycle. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to the mayor, who is going to introduce our core strategy team members who are going to walk us through the first set of recommendations.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your commitment. So let's dive in right now with our first priority area, which is business retention. There's a lot of ground to cover, but To be respectful of everyone's time, we'll have about 5 minutes for each subject area. Shamburi Lee will walk us through this group's recommendations. Shamburi.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity. I just want to take a quick second to thank the City of Minneapolis, the coalition. It's been a great learning experience. My group has been focused on area number 1, which is the business retention. But before I wanted to get going on that, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the working members of the group. We've had some wonderful conversations in the last few weeks here. Thank you to Anthony Taylor from the Cultural Wellness Center, Jonathan Weinhagen from the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, Mike Tamale from the Neighborhood Development Center. So thank you all. And then myself, Chanbury, we've had some wonderful, meaningful conversations in the last few weeks here. And with this, we have come up with some recommendations for Area 1. And Area 1, what we're looking at is to develop and deploy resources to preserve in the community the businesses and the cultural institutions that were there before the death of George Floyd, whether or not the property owner chooses to rebuild or repair the directly impacted building. So that was our area of focus. And through that process, we came up with 5 recommendations. We talked a lot about many of the possibilities to even maybe, starting a new initiative, but that would take us times, years and months to really get things going. So we're looking at some of the possibilities and some of the great things that our community is already doing, and how do we get those out to our community? So next slide here. Some of the things we talked about are the 5 key things we talked about. I'm going to brief through them really quick and give you more detailed information here. The first one is to deploy. The first one here is to deploy additional community navigators. The second one here is to provide intentional technical assistance to support impacted business. The next one is to find and support temporary spaces for businesses along Lake Street Avenue that has been displaced, and then to provide customized financial support for impacted business. And the 5th recommendation is to be attentive to the cultural elements in our community. So to run back to recommendation number 1, to deploy additional community navigators. What we're looking at is to deploy more navigators who are community-based to help our impacted businesses get out to the resources that are available. There are a lot of community-based organizations, the City of Minneapolis, that has a lot of great resources and programs that are available, but our business owners, they're not getting the access to these because they don't know how to access it. So what we're recommending is to find and to deploy additional community navigators from the community to help these community get to the resources that are available to them. The second recommendation is to provide intentional technical assistance to support impacted business. Now, as you all know, you may have 2 buildings and 2 businesses next to each other, but their needs are completely different. And in times of COVID and in civil unrest, what we need to do is we need to start thinking about the technical side of this. How do we shift and pivot these businesses to impact to the new reality of being a COVID customer? What we need to bring into the technical assistance team is more intentional technical assistance. What we're looking at is to find people who are web experts who can help people promote businesses online, help people pivot and change their businesses online to make money online. As you all know, that is the new thing that's up and coming. So that's our second recommendation, is to provide very intentional technical assistance, bringing people who reflect the community to help them. I think that's another key part of this, is being very intentional in who we're bringing in. Moving to the next part here is number 3, find and support temporary spaces for businesses along Lake Street that has been displaced. As you all know, many businesses have been displaced through this whole ordeal, and businesses need a place to go. As many of you all know, as a business owner myself, having a business, even though our business is not functioning, we still have bills to pay, mouths to feed, and trying to keep a roof over our head. The goal and the purpose of this is to make sure that businesses are still operational in times of need, even though they don't have a space to operate the business. What we're looking for is a partnership with many of the businesses and some of the vacant buildings within the cities. How do we partner with them to bring these businesses into these spaces? And through that, how do we get finances to help businesses move into these places? The goal of the coalition is to make sure that when we're providing temporary spaces, that these businesses are going to go in and be successful as they move into these temporary spaces in times of rebuilding their original business spot. The 4th recommendation that we have is to provide customized financial to support impacted businesses. And through that process, what we're looking at is there's a lot of money coming down the pipeline, as you all know, from the federal level, from the state level, from the county level, the city level. But there are still a lot of businesses that are not getting these fundings and grants. What we're looking for is unrestricted fundings to help these businesses that are not getting these money. There are still people who don't know that there are money coming down the pipeline. And so with the technical assistance navigators, we can help provide, help point them to the right place to these customized financial support. A good example is through NDC, where they're providing flexible payments on their loans, interest-only payment, and then given forgiveness from NDC. Other things we may consider are the Midtown Global Markets, these, and this Mercado Central. We have businesses in these places that don't have access to these funds. So that's one of the other recommendations, is to find unrestricted fundings to help these small businesses. Lastly, what we want to be is we want to be very attentive to the cultural elements in our community. Minneapolis is such a wonderful place because of the melting pot that it is. What we want to do is we want to design all of the programs, not just our program or this program or any other program, but to be attentive to the cultural elements, to ensure that we reduce disparity in access and eligibility, and to increase the assistance available to the communities identified as having greater needs or are in need of help. So that is what our recommendation is for Area 1. For business retention, we believe that with the coalitions that we're working in, the community champion, and through some of these recommendations, we can keep our business within our community. Thank you for the opportunity, Mayor.
Thank you, Sean Burry. I'm especially excited about the community navigator work. I know that's something that's been a recurring theme through several of these areas, and I know it's something you've looked at very closely. Next, I want to invite up Felicia Perry from the West Broadway Business Association to give us a walkthrough on areas 2 and 3, and that's prioritizing BIPOC businesses and supporting entrepreneurs who invest in community respectively. Felicia, thank you for your work.
Peace, everybody. How y'all doing? My name is Felicia Perry, Executive Director of the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition. My work group was comprised of some pretty brilliant individuals, myself, Yusra Arab, Robert Lilligren, Marcus Owens, and we covered 2 areas, and area 2 was prioritizing BIPOC minority-owned businesses, where we had the goal of developing and deploying resources for these businesses and nonprofits that owned or leased space in a building that was destroyed or directly impacted, and where insurance would not cover the loss. And one of the first things we discussed was developing a standardized assessment tool in order to really get a grasp on what it is businesses needed, what the impacts were, and what the needs were. And using this standardized assessment tool, it would be simple, adaptable, so that communities can make them accessible to the people that they serve. And adaptations to language and cultural differences would be made, but the data points would be standardized across the city. Recommendation 2 would be to develop community navigators capacity. And this support would include things like reading paperwork, responding to notices, a bit more of that one-on-one support through the journey of this process. And additionally, we would invest in the technical assistance providers that we already have. That includes legal, financial, insurance, so that the business owners have better access to that. And these navigators would actually work in complement with the technical assistance providers we already have in a lot of these communities. And that would act kind of as like a host. These TA providers and organizations would act as a hub for the navigators, better kind of streamlining this wraparound sort of support to offer the businesses. I think somebody's mic is on. Recommendation 3 is to expand financial resources, and this would be a broad spectrum of financial tools and resources for the impacted communities. And it would include things like low interest rates and/or forgivable loans, assistance to maintain payroll, help identifying temporary locations, and that would, excuse me, as well as tiered financing options that would be based on the size of the business. Area 3 was also covered by our group, and this was specifically around supporting entrepreneurs who invest in community, so that our focus isn't just on the businesses or the buildings or the properties and the damage of that, but really what is the ongoing sustainable impact. Excuse me. And so within this, we had a few different recommendations. Recommendation 1 was to enhance community level wealth building. We would be encouraging a culture of community level wealth building within the city of Minneapolis. And that makes me think about actually businesses like the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, which exists in North Minneapolis, and thinking about really intentionally investing in those type of programs and resources and assets that we have in communities, and also using them as a model in places that do not have them and have a need. Creation of a small business academy was our second recommendation. And the idea is to create a space for entrepreneurs and business owners to plan. This idea that we kind of have to function under some of these systems that require us to do a lot with a little and not a lot of time actually tend to be quite oppressive. And so the idea behind this is to actually give some flexibility and adaptability in support of the business entrepreneur's vision. And also leading into that recommendation is to create space so that they can take risk without losing access to future financing opportunities. We also recommend expanding available financial resources. And this means we need to be engaging with traditional financial institutions in order to bring in resources to community level businesses. So there are businesses that aren't seen as bankable. The current system either needs to be very much changed or new ones created in order to provide functional services to stabilize and grow our businesses. And this would include things like fractional executive management to help like propel businesses, support businesses in that way. And additional supports would include supply procurement for impacted corridors, corridor industry level buying of raw materials, cooperative business ownership and worker-owned opportunities, as well as other things like conversions, mergers, and other opportunities, but really opening up the space and support so business owners have access to those possibilities if they wish. And I believe that concludes our part of the presentation. And yeah, we'll turn it over to real estate.
Well, thank you so much, Felicia. Especially excited about some of the recommendations you had around financial resources, the possibility of having some form of a 0 to low interest loan program that really could be a game changer. And I know we're all super psyched about the prospects of the Small Business Academy as well. So let's head in here to area 4. And I believe this is going to be someone else from your team. Are we moving on to Kenya right now?
Yeah, we're moving on to Kenya for area 4.
So let's head it. I will head it over to Kenya McKnight-Ahad, who is the founder and CEO of the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, and she'll give an overview of Area 4, which will focus on real estate owners and tenants. Kenya.
Thank you, Mayor Fry. Can everyone hear me okay? Great.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So good morning and welcome. Thank you for allowing us to present this information here. I want to give a shout out to my core team members on Group 4, and that is Anisha Murphy of the Community Reinvestment Fund, Henry Jimenez of the Latino Economic Development Center, Roxanne Anderson of the Minnesota Trans Health Coalition, and Allison Sharkey of the Lake Street Council. Thank you for all your great work in this. We banged it out a lot, so we had a lot of outside meetings and were able to put this together, so thank you. Group 4, Area 4 is focused on developing resources for owners whose properties have been destroyed and directly impacted, and where insurance will not cover the loss. We also think it's critically important to use this as an opportunity to create wealth building opportunities throughout communities of colors, particularly Black, Indigenous, and other immigrant communities, to really build an opportunity to own and invest in real estate property throughout the city of Minneapolis, and certainly along the major corridors that we're focusing on here today. And also including including first right of refusal for current tenants. And the next slide. In that, we have developed really 4 key areas, but today we'll focus a little just on 3. And the first one is really focusing on additional funding. We see our group as really a foundational aspect to what the Minneapolis Forward really is going to anchor itself on is the land acquisition, really focusing on the land, the ownership, and just kind of getting a handle on that would help us. But we also know that in order to make that possible, we have to create additional and specific funding solutions and strategies and tactics that will accelerate economic growth and stability across the city. And so with that, we're talking about money to purchase land, money to go directly into 3 levels of support from short-term to medium to long-term. So we're looking at this through a 10-year window, and we're asking for immediate support, of course, for entrepreneurs in the forms of grants, loans, just a mix, a variety will be important in the short, but also in the long for sustainability. The second area is really on business retention and cultivation. So it's great, to give resources to entrepreneurs in the short, but we've got to be able to support their capacity throughout the long term, which is where the cultivation comes in at. So the core strategies and tactics and solutions to retain and cultivate businesses, it's going to have to happen through an economic development inclusion, which increases the community ownership and intentional investments along key opportunity zones that advance, again, the citywide economy. I have to stress that because we talk a lot about one element of the city, but this is about the entire city. This includes North Minneapolis. We have to look at South Minneapolis, of course, Lake Street, but it's certainly West Broadway. But there are a lot of other areas across the city that were impacted. And then a lot of areas that also just offer opportunity for us to kind of maximize on this moment. In that, I would say we are looking at how to support entrepreneurs interested in real estate, interested in purchasing, but may not have the capacity right now. How do we support and grow their capacity into ownership? Real estate project management and brokerage, or we're going to need that element. Subsidies for commercial space, prospective community commercial ownership, cultural CDCs, and for commercial and residential development. We certainly have had that in the past, and we need to see that happen again as part of how we can ensure that cultural communities, and to be specific, we're talking about Black, Indigenous, immigrant communities, have real estate and resources to actually own property, commercial and residential throughout our city. And then cultural and economic tools that will support definitely historical Black businesses who, do have a lower percentage of asset ownership in the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis, but certainly all emerging businesses who are interested in commercial land and general business ownership. And lastly, one of the, pieces we really want to maximize this moment on is to build cultural and generational sustainable development. So that means, that will also help increase generational wealth building across our community. So again, ownership is key in this, and so land acquisition and resources to make that possible is everything and foundational to us being able to turn our city from a place of despair to a place of opportunity, right? Which is what George Floyd came here seeking to begin. The city of Minneapolis is opportunity. So we want to make sure this is grounded in that. We want to make sure that we can use this as a moment to help stabilize communities of color, particularly Black, again, immigrant, and our Indigenous communities through generations, which have not always been afforded these opportunities in Minneapolis, but we have that moment now to be extraordinary and to make sure that we can raise up neighborhoods, local markets, and use it through a citywide economic approach. And that, I would say the last piece that it is not here though, we also think that we need to have a public policy approach to how we do this, where we really have broad agendas that are supported by the city and other folks that will help maximize opportunities for our cultural businesses and economic opportunities throughout state, federal, local governments, including regional. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that ownership is the key, especially when you're talking about this anti-displacement work. Ownership is the real guard against any of that form of displacement. So we are working with Minneapolis business, philanthropic, and foundational leaders to put resources behind this work. I'm real honored to have Sarah Barrow with Xcel Energy here to highlight why her team is getting involved and helping out. Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Really happy to be here. I would like to thank, of course, the Mayor, Vice President Jenkins, and a special thank you to Jonathan Weinhagen, who I know has been working tirelessly on this, and to Sean Pierce in the Mayor's office, who is awesome. And I am newly involved in this, but I'm so impressed with the coalition members and the core strategy team. You've done amazing work so far, and I'm just proud and humbled to be part of this community-based and community-led work on behalf of Xcel Energy. You know, Xcel Energy is committed to being part of the solution on racial equity and fostering an environment of diversity and inclusion in both our workplace and all the communities we serve. We have a very long history of working with Minneapolis, which is our headquarters city, and we're so proud to partner with them as we work together to build a stronger, more resilient city for all that live here. So just happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your commitment and from Xcel. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jonathan Weinhagen now, who's going to bring us home and speak to how others, whether it's corporate, philanthropic, foundational, community partners, can get involved. Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Sarah, for Xcel's ongoing commitment to this city, and a huge thanks to the core strategy team. I have never worked with a brighter group of leaders who are more committed and passionate about the community that they live and work in. And I'm just really excited for what lies ahead for our city. You know, we're fortunate to have one of the best corporate nonprofit and philanthropic communities in the world. Time and time again, these institutions have stepped up to support and invest in our community, to partner with us, and to tackle some of our greatest challenges. I think we can all recognize that rebuilding a city is going to take a next level of commitment. It's why we're calling on leaders of private, philanthropic, and nonprofit organizations to walk alongside this community-led coalition and to join us as critical partners through funding, volunteering, and offering up skills and expertise. We're encouraging anybody who is interested in partnering and working with the Minneapolis Forward Coalition to check out the website, minneapolismn.gov/Minneapolis Forward. Or you've heard about how awesome Sean Pierce is a number of times on this call. You can reach out to her and find out directly just how awesome she is. She's the Director of Economic Development and Inclusion Policy in the Mayor's Office. Her contact information is available here. We just really look forward to coming together as a community once again to envision the inclusive city that this community deserves. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great. So I think we've got about 10 or 15 minutes or so for some questions from our media partners. And Sarah McKenzie, can you open up that line, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Fry. I'm going to now call on members of the media that have RSVP'd for this press conference to see if they have questions. I'm going to start with Liz Navratil of the Star Tribune. Liz, are you there? Do you have questions?
Yes. I'm curious, what will it take logistically to get some of these programs off the ground? Do they have to go through council or other approval processes? And is there sort of a timeline for launching these initiatives?
Thank you, Liz. I will start out answering part of that question, but then if there are additions, I'm going to kick it to Sean and/or one of our core strategy team members there. So much of this work, while it can be facilitated and guided in some way by the city, we're making sure to center our Black and brown leaders in the process, so they are the ones that are helping to direct funds, direct monies, and figure out how to implement some of these recommendations that they've presented to you today. The money itself flows through, in many ways, the Minneapolis Foundation. So my understanding is that for the most part, it's not necessary to have much of these funds go through a regular city process. Now, that being said, there are other sources that can come directly from the city itself. For instance, we've got a commercial property development fund, which will be focused on making sure that business owners of color not just own the business, but then own the brick and mortar and the real estate on which the business sits. And that's about $3 million that will be allocated along many of these corridors. And so that will help supplement the work. Ms. Pierce, if you want to jump in and add anything to what I said, that would be very helpful. Sean, you may be on mute.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Exactly what the mayor said. The only addition that I would add here is that much of what you're hearing, really, again, community-led, is really building on the incredible work that Kenya and Felicia and many of the other groups that you've heard from today are already doing. So some of it's already underway. You might hear another time from Jonathan Weinhagen and that team talking about what it means to have temporary space with some of our partners. Yes, for Lake Street, but also for those along West Broadway and throughout the city who are displaced and other areas. So there's the funding component, and then there's the implementation. I'm really grateful to our full coalition of members, such as Sarah Barrow, Steve Kramer, the Polat Family Foundation, and others who have already really leaned in and said, you know what, where can we help? So we're working on getting corporate volunteer structures stood up. We are starting with our work to figure out this acquisition model. We're looking at what it's going to take to temporarily relocate some of these businesses. So the work is already underway. There'll be many opportunities to get involved. But the beauty of this being really community rooted by people who are already experts in their field and expert really in the lives of our neighbors every day is that we're building on what's already in place, and really grateful to all of our core strategy team members for standing up at this really pivotal moment to be alongside and leading our city in the right direction.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. Next, I'd like to see if Mohammed Ibrahim of the Associated Press is on the call and has any questions that he would like to ask.
Yeah, I'm here. So I am curious, follow up on Liz's question about the funding. Will that be mainly facilitated through the Minneapolis Foundation, or will there be other sources of funding that include the city and maybe this state as well?
Thank you for the question, Mohammed. There will very likely be other sources of funding as well. As I mentioned just a second ago, the city of Minneapolis already has commitments through the Commercial Property Development Fund. We already have business navigators in some form that are doing some of this work and led by Zoe, and that work can additionally be bolstered through any external contracting done along with the foundation, but again, with the coalition members at front and center. I'll say additionally, yes, we do have ongoing asks and partnerships along with the state government to get some additional assistance there, and as well from the feds.
All right, so next we'll check in with Nina Moyni of Minnesota Public Radio to see if she has any questions.
Hi, yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about the process of helping displaced businesses. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of space on Lake Street. So are there other areas that Minneapolis Forward is looking at? And then I'm also curious about the past 2 months and providing that customized financial support. And if people haven't had that help yet, Are they closing their doors for good, or how do you help them account for the past 2 months since the unrest happened?
Thank you for the question, Nina. There's a balance with efficiency and speed on the one hand, but then also making sure that this is community generated and community led on the other. You know, what I would hate to do is very quickly introduce a process unilaterally, make decisions simply by elected officials without engaging with the community, which of course could be a faster process, but it wouldn't lead to the transformation that we're ultimately insisting that happens. And so, you know, through COVID-19, we did have a series of emergency supports that went out, both in terms of housing as well as business assistance. We are well aware that those supports did not reach the need. We know that both state and federal partners have also reached out with additional supports. We know that those didn't meet the needs. And so a big part of what we're doing now is making sure to get these recommendations set up in a way that prevents some of the gentrification that could potentially come down the pike, including the purchase by out of community or out of state real estate entities. You know, we want to see community ownership at the end of this. Yes, it is a tall order, but we are most definitely up to the task. Sean, if you want to either answer and/or direct to any of the other core strategy team members that could further elaborate on what I've been saying.
Absolutely. I'll look to Jonathan Weinhagen, invite you to speak a little bit about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, I mean, in real time, we're talking to business owners across the city. So we talk a lot about Lake Street, but West Broadway, 38th in Chicago, again, every corner of our city that was impacted, about the need for some immediate location, ranging from retail to commercial interests that they've just been displaced because of this destruction. You know, we're in partnership with the Mall of America, you know, now taking applications for a community commons at the mall, a temporary location to place and provide some technical assistance to retailers through the end of the year and into 2021. Again, with that, you know, vision and commitment to getting them back into a position to come back to the city of Minneapolis and continue to flourish here. Similarly, with commercial tenants, we are talking to the Building Owners and Managers Association and other commercial real estate folks to see if we can't identify some physical built environment to temporarily locate businesses who aren't able to go back to Lake Street or go back to West Broadway or go back to 38th and Chicago, so that they can continue to function and operate and keep their doors open.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I know Kenya has input on this as well.
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to add that, you know, just so we have, you know, West Broadway Area Coalition, and Felicia can speak to this a lot stronger than myself, and the Lake Street Council. Both institutions have funds that they are raising still, so you're welcome to donate to their funds. That is going towards supporting businesses' ability to stay alive along the corridors, as well as across the communities in themselves. And so I know that West Broadway is still kind of working on building out their fund more. Definitely more resources are needed, and setting up, you know, their structures and processes to begin deploying resources out to businesses in North Minneapolis impacted. Lake Street has deployed, I think, more than $5 million out of the funds they've raised to businesses along the corridor, up to $25,000 grants. But again, that isn't enough. Some of these businesses have sustained a substantial amount of damage and loss and revenue that, you know, even the amounts that they are giving through these wonderful grant programs is not enough to keep them afloat. So more is definitely needed. Businesses are often lacking resources for their actual livability because they're people and they have bills and things to pay, and folks are typically just focused on the physical structures of the businesses and not the people who run them. So there's always a need to keep supporting what's happening between particularly these two institutions, West Broadway Area and Business Coalition and the Lake Street Council, because they hold a nice brink of our business economy with entrepreneurs throughout the corridor. So, but that is something that is happening that definitely needs continued support.
Thank you, Kenya. And Nina, I believe you also asked the question about whether or not businesses are closing their doors and if they intend to come back. And I just really want to echo, I think, where the mayor started, right? So we're in this moment and all of us are really, really clear about being in this place because of what happened to George Floyd as a Black man in the city of Minneapolis, and we've seen that throughout our country. The reality is all of the impacted communities were also dealing with the results of COVID-19 and what that meant for our business community. So we have some pretty immediate needs that we're asking everyone that's listening into this to try to help us with. We need help on supply chain. Felicia talked about that in her presentation. Some of our businesses that did just fine through COVID-19, who've done very well, even in the midst of civil unrest, some of our BIPOC-owned businesses, historically Black-owned businesses, have done just fine with all of that going on. And now supply and demand is kicking in, and they're paying, you know, some of them 7 times more to get access to the goods that they need in order to run their business, right? So we're looking for and working on dedicated supply chains as well. So again, we want all of our businesses in Minneapolis to thrive here. We believe that actually all of this has impacted our entire city, not just the buildings and the businesses that we will think about. And so even for those businesses that might choose or might need to close their doors right now, our small business team, it just really is incredible. And we're always looking forward to helping those businesses come back and our entrepreneurs really thrive and grow in the city.
All right, next I'd like to go to Kate Raditz of WCCO TV to see if she has questions.
Thank you. Mayor, I think it was at the beginning of the call that you had said that housing was not addressed in this specific, in these areas of action. But can you talk about, homelessness and mental illness and homelessness of people living on the streets is still an issue. Can you talk about what will it take to bring services to the people that are living on the streets right now?
Thank you, Kate. Yes, I will touch on that briefly, making a note that while that issue is extraordinarily important, this group is dealing with the economic inclusion side. So yes, the city is working on a number of different initiatives, first based on harm reduction in and throughout our unsheltered homeless population, making sure that they're protected from COVID-19, that the areas are safe, that there are health and sanitary and cleanliness stations that are set up. Secondly, we've got a medium term, which includes shelters. We just recently announced 3 new shelters that will be coming online over the next year plus. The first being a culturally specific and sensitive shelter that is built around our Native community, hopefully getting up by December 1st of this year. The second being a women's shelter located in North Minneapolis in the first quarter or so of next year. And then the final one being an Exodus project with Catholic Charities that will be geared towards people who have who are in need of some form of either hospice care or mental treatment, mental illness. And then the final one, which should not and cannot get overlooked, is long-term and stable housing, and our city has invested many times the previous record in ensuring very deeply affordable and low-income housing.
Thank you. And with these recommendations, can you just kind of remind people what this process looks like when you are, working in this cross sector, and how it kind of works when you're doing the discussion of these action items?
Sure. Can you, Kate, can you just rephrase the question a little bit so I understand better?
Yeah. Can you just explain a little bit of how you're gathering this feedback and how you're then creating these areas of action so people understand how you came up with these proposals?
So these proposals did not come from me. As far as the recommendations go, those that really deserve the credit is the core strategy team that has been set up. And so I'm going to really turn it to them. So Sean, do you want to maybe direct or facilitate? I'd rather, so we don't have multiple people talking at the same time.
Sure. Kenya, I see you're on camera. Would you like to take that, or Felicia? Felicia, do you want to speak to our process, as I know you're awesome about?
Sure, I can speak a little bit to the process. I like process.
I know.
I enjoy the journey of process. So what's been really, what I appreciate about this process is the time that we're allowing ourselves to be able to really be intentional about this work. We've all, as a coalition, asked a lot of questions. I asked a lot of questions when I was invited to be the co-chair around, like, would this just be something that we're contributing to the city of Minneapolis because we would rather be spending our time in our communities. And these are the type of folks that are on this coalition that were who have been working for about 7 weeks, meeting a couple of times a week. And so the process really looks like us committing some time to connecting on a regular basis. We established what our areas would be very early on, hashed through those, really talked about are we intentionally supporting those? One of the questions I often ask is, in the end, how we set this up now, in the end, who ends up being the beneficiary of all of this work, and very intentionally wanting to bring as many voices into the room. So we couldn't always bring every individual person, but there's a lot of experiences that someone like myself has had directly with our business owners, our businesses and organizations across the city. So a lot of my work, of course, is in North Minneapolis on the West Broadway corridor, but I'm very much connected with business owners in South Minneapolis, as well as even St. Paul. So the intent behind all of that is really to see how we can take care of ourselves. I think others can speak a little bit more on the process, but it really happened a lot within our group, and we would get support from Sean around continuing to move this process forward, because honestly, a lot of us are managing a lot within our other work that kind of brought us to this space.
Awesome. Thank you, Felicia. The only other thing I would amplify that Felicia just pointed out is that it was the request and the responsibility of every member of the core strategy team to bring with them all of the work that they're doing in community. So I've had a number of neighborhood associations, for example, and other people reach out and say, hey, can we get a seat at the table? It's like, well, this group is probably putting in something on the order of 10 to 15 hours a week in addition to what they're doing in their current spaces. And so when Felicia is representing, Felicia, I'm just going to use you as an example for a moment. When she's representing herself as executive director at the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition, she's also bringing with her work as an artist and the work in the artist collectives who are really moving throughout the city, and the work with Black businesses, and the list really goes on. The same thing with every member, right? So when Robert Lilligren says to us very, very clearly, this work can't just be about the buildings that are burned down. We have to also support our communities that protected themselves in a different way and that have physical structures. He's bringing not just NACD, not just conversations, sometimes even around encampment, but he's bringing in the totality of the work that he touches. And so the responsibility, again, and the request of every one of them is to do that. And then the responsibility and the request on all of our parts is to reverberate that back out. So that's why I'm really just grateful for this opportunity. Yes, with you all as the media, but I think more importantly, frankly, for our neighbors to really understand just how hard these partners, along with the city of Minneapolis, the philanthropic community, and larger institutional partners really are fighting at every single level to make sure that our city continues to be the economic engine for this state, and that we do that in a just and inclusive way.
All right, I know we're approaching the end of our time here. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, I'm going to call on lastly Gordon Severson from KARE 11 TV to see if he has any questions. Gordon, are you on the call? He might not. Okay, then I will move to Kerrigan Miller of the Business Journal to see if she has any questions.
Hi, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I have two questions. Both of them I think are relatively brief. One, there was talk about finding vacant businesses on Lake Street and elsewhere. Have any other businesses been specifically identified besides the Mall of America? And two, do you have a sense of how many businesses which were damaged during the unrest have already called it quits and left?
Thank you for the question. That may be best directed towards Jonathan Weinhagen.
Thanks, Mayor. We have not identified other partners that we're ready to kind of share formally. As of yet, we're in active conversations with a number of other businesses and business owners who are really eager to be helpful. So we're just kind of ironing out the final details on that. With regards to companies that have called it quits to date, I might ask Sean Pierce because I know she's tracking that really closely. The one point that I would make on that is, we've got these dual crises. We have the pandemic, which is causing pressure kind of generally across the city and the region and the state. We also have the unrest and the destruction that was caused in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. So two different things, and we're trying to really track those two things concurrently but separately at the same time.
This is Allison, and I can provide some information as well.
Allison.
This is Allison Sharkey, Executive Director of the Lake Street Council. I can add a little bit of information on that. So of the 400 or so businesses that we have funded through the We Love Lake Street program, about 50% of those have reopened. So nearly everyone was closed during the civil unrest, and around 200 of those have reopened. The other 200 all state that they are trying to reopen. There have been about a dozen of our businesses on the Lake Street corridor that have announced permanent closures. In terms of space and where displaced businesses can go, there have been some success stories so far. Gandhi Mahal, for example, just signed a lease over at the Chef Shack on Franklin Avenue. I believe Seward Redesign helped quite a bit with that relocation. So that'll be a temporary project for a couple of years while they focus on rebuilding their site that they own. And then I don't know if it's public information yet, but there's at least one business that is going to be moving into the Midtown Global Market. And I know that Neighborhood Development Center is speaking with some other displaced businesses as well about space that's available at the Global Market. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. We always want to be respectful of the transitions of any business, whether it's a legacy transition because a family member is moving on to retirement, or they're dealing with finances related to COVID-19. One of the things that we talk about at the city is that sometimes the best decision for a business is to temporarily close so that they can open with a new business model. And the reality actually is of COVID-19 is that we're going to see a new way of being, not just in the city of Minneapolis, but across the country, frankly. So we're doing our best to absolutely track those businesses that are making decisions about closing and doing everything we can to align behind the businesses that are saying they want to open and they want to do things differently. So when you've heard about those fractional executives that Felicia covered in her group, that's going to be critical. Some of our successful businesses, 20 years in the city, frankly, are going to need to think through different business models in this time. Making sure that we have the supply chains covered will be critical. Some of the businesses that aren't opening on West Broadway or on 38th or on Chicago or in Uptown or on Lake Street, again, because we have many, almost all of the commercial corridors in our city have been impacted by this. Some of those businesses just need supply. They need like new windows, and the nation is seeing a supply shortage. So I think we want to be mindful that the closures, people might want to say that is due to the death of George Floyd. There are so many compounding factors that the best way that we move forward is make sure that we're bringing all resources to bear for our city, and that we keep in mind that a traditional recovery already takes longer than 5 years. We're anticipating that total recovery takes even longer than that across the country. And so we need everyone to be in with us for the entirety of this journey.
Sean, if I can add to that piece of it, is that what we know from a report that was done with the African American Leadership Forum on the Black Business Collective Support, which myself and several others are a part of, is that more than 50% of the Black businesses across Minnesota have been impacted and closed due to COVID and the uprisings. And with that, we cannot forget about the gig economy workers and businesses. And knowing that a large percentage of Black businesses in the state of Minnesota are independent contractors, sole proprietors, et cetera, who, by the way, do not qualify for most of the programming resources that are out here for small business relief. And so that's a whole base of entrepreneurs who might have co-working space or work out of their homes, home-based businesses that are also important, not just the ones who have bricks and mortars. And so they make up an important aspect of our economy. And so let's make sure we're mindful of them in this conversation, but certainly they're impacted. They're not able to take on the jobs they used to. So their revenue streams are definitely lacking right now. And some of them are trying to figure out new ways, new business ideas. I know what we're seeing here at the Black Women's Wealth Alliance is that the majority of the Black women who come to us are trying to start new businesses because the businesses they had before are just not doable or scalable under COVID. So we're seeing that a lot. Just want to say that.
Thank you so much, Kenya. Thank you. I know we're close to time, so I'll turn it over to you, Mayor.
Yes, that was Kenya McKnight Ahad for the press on the line. Thank you everyone so much for joining. Like I said in the very beginning, this is a community-driven, community-led process. We've got some extraordinary leaders on this Minneapolis Forward Community Now Coalition. I'm so proud to be working with them. If there are additional questions, please don't hesitate to direct them to my office. We will be happy to either answer them ourselves to the extent we can and/or direct them to the extraordinary leaders that have been on this call. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.